So here the definition of what they call ombongosum is what we have the three classifications of things that are direct, non-fraudulent cognitions, right? And they fall into three categories. One is indirect, initial direct perception. You have sequential perception, and then you have non-ascertaining direct perception, right? So you have this in your notes as part of the Lodi Dun, the 7 minds, different types of minds that they have. Of the first two is Tsema, and the second one is Cheshe.
Yeah.
And there's a Nalamangepa. Nalamangepa means that it doesn't ascertain it. You know, it doesn't ascertain it. But these are the three. When we talk about direct perceptions, we're talking about these initial, sequential, and non-ascertaining. We'll get into that later on. The definition of an initial direct perception is fresh. It's fresh. What does fresh mean? Remember we talked about that yesterday? Remember what fresh?
Yes.
Jimba Noah. Jimba, which means is that it's not obscured by, it's not an obscure type of perception. Right? In this case, when we're talking about fresh, we're talking about it being initial also. And that makes it the difference between initial and sequential. Right? Sequential means that it comes after something. But when we talk about the direct non-conceptual perception, we're talking about a perception that is initial. Right? Perception is a fresh, it's a non-fraudulent mind, meaning that it's not mistaken. Remember we gave the example of having blue glasses on and looking at the snow mountain? That we have an appearance, but the appearance itself is fraudulent, because to the eye consciousness, that which is white appears to be blue. You know, read through this again and again. So later on, when we get into the various types of minds and things like that, or the other types of non-conceptual perceptions, and we get a better understanding. So now an example of this is the first instance of eye consciousness, of the eye, direct perception of a vase. When you just open your eyes and the initial appearance or the initial perception of the vase is non-fraudulent, because as a vase appears, it is it's perceived, and it is fresh because it's initial. You know, non-fraudulent because it's not mistaken. Right? Okay, so here, the example of this is the first instance of the eye's direct perception of a vase. The definition of a sequential perception. Now we go to number 1, and after number 1, the number 2, second explanation of it. The definition of a sequential perception is a perception that is developed after the initial perception. So anything that from the number 2 instance to all the way afterwards, that the perception, anything that comes in sequence with the initial perception is what we call a sequential perception.
Is this sequential direct perception also fresh or not?
It's a direct perception, but it's a sequential direct perception.
Not fresh, no longer fresh.
Not fresh, because fresh means initial. Fresh means initial, or it means first. So in this school, this is written in accordance to the Dodeba school, is that when you first see, you're looking in your room and for a vase, and the first time that it appears to your eye consciousness is what we call fresh, or we call it in the Tibetan it says Dambo, which is first. So you have that first cognition of it, and then everything else is sequential. All right? Sequential, same thing as the word means, coming in a sequence or after something. All right?
Yes.
So if you look at the vase and then you look away and then you look back at the vase, that second readjusting or looking at the vase again is once again the initial one. You have the initial perception, which is the the first, and then everything else becomes sequential. So you can have many instances of a valid perception. Say you blink and then you see it again. That every time that you initiate that, it becomes fresh.